Now we look at the next subtopic, which is the WTO Agreement of Significance to Codex. We know that WTO is a World Trade Organization, and there are two WTO agreements of most that significant for the international food trade, which are number one that you have to know is the Agreement on the Application of Sanitary and Phytosanitary Measures, or known as SPS, which this agreement concern measures applied to protect human, animal and plant health. And number two is the agreement on TBT, the technical barriers to trade, which refers to technical regulations and conformity assessment procedures and applies to all commodities, not just food. So the WTO, they have the agreement on the application of SPS, sanitary and phytosanitary measurement, or we know as a WTO SPS agreement, and they have the agreement on technical barriers to trade, the WTO TBT agreement. So the agreement on the SPS is calls on the countries to harmonize their national standards with international standards, guidelines and recommendations. And Codex standards are defined as international standard, guidelines or recommendation, which means that kalau the country want to have the SPSS agreement, the national standard must be harmonized with the international standard, which is the Codex standards. And same goes also the TBT. The TBT agreement calls on countries to use relevant international standards when they exist. There are three sisters under the SPS agreement as reference point for number one. They will look into the animal health, which is under the World Organization for Animal Health. They have under the plant health, which is the International Plant Protection Convention, and they have a human health, which is the one that we discussed just now, which is the Codex Alimentarius Commission, which is the Joint FAO WHO Food Standards Program. So here you can see how the WTO SPS agreement with the Codex, when we look at into the sanitary and phytosanitary measures, which is to protect human life and health, that resulting from in terms of the additives, the contaminants, the veterinary drugs, the pesticide, the pathogen and mechanism. This is all the general standards for the under the subsidiary of the general standards, which is the harmonized sanitary and phytosanitary measures that is based on the international standards. And for the Codex food safety provision that recognized by the WTO SPS agreement, which is, for example, maximum level for additive, we have for the Codex community food additive. Okay, we have the contaminant, which is the maximum level for the Codex community that is under the Codex community on contaminant food and etc. So this is the one that we see that this is the sanitary or phytosanitary measures. They look at the additive and it align with the Codex on the food safety. The contaminant also we have the Codex committee on the contaminant food. In terms of veterinary drug pesticides, they have in terms of maximum residue limits for CCPR, and also we have in terms of veterinary drugs and etc. So you can see this is a harmonized sanitary and phytosanitary measures that is based on the international standards. Okay. So for food safety, the SPSS agreement refers to standards developed by Codex in the 5 areas. Number one, they look at into the food additives. They have also in terms of the veterinary drug and pesticide residues. They have in terms of the contaminants, the methods of analyzing and sampling, and the codes and guidelines of hygienic practices. So WTO, the SPS agreement with an Codex. Now we look at the second one, which is the TBT agreement. The TBT agreement is to ensure that the technical regulations and standards do not create unnecessary obstacles to trade, okay? Which it covers not just food but everything, any type of products. for example, cars, radios, and etc. This agreement is aimed to protect consumer through information, mainly in the form of labeling requirement, nutrition requirement, the quality provisions, and the method of analysis to promote fair trade practices. Food standard provisions not covered by the SPSS agreement would be considered in the TBT-related measures. Okay. So in the TBT, cover all aspects of consumer protection not complemented under the WTO SPS agreement in terms of the standard and technical regulations, in terms of the conformity assessment procedure, in terms of provision for packaging, marking, labeling, and all these WTO TBT agreement, okay, so they need to harmonize with the technical regulation based on international standards, which is our codex. So on codex, they look at into non-food safety provision that is relevant to WTO TBT agreement. For example, labeling. Okay, we have the codex community food labeling. We have in terms of nutrition, in terms of quality provision, and also method of analysis. And also the packaging, storage, and in terms of inspection and certification. So this is the one that have the TBT, WTO TBT agreement, and it's aligned with the codex. And this WTO SPS TBT agreement and codex, if you can see here, okay. So WTO SPS is a sanitary and phytosanitary measures, and WTO TBT is more on technical and regulation standards. And these national sanitary and phytosanitary measures and technical regulations, they are consistent with the codex to fulfill the requirement of the WTO SPS TBT agreements. And these are the reference point to resolve dispute in terms of international trade. There's a matter of safety and non-safety in terms of the hormone in meat. They will look at under the WTO SPS panel, and they want to identify of the product which is under WTO TBT panel context standards for sardines, for example. And this reference point is to harmonize the national sanitary phytosanitary measures, standards, and regulations. So finally, you can see this is the harmonized standard, okay? Which is, for example, in one product, okay, the SPS and TBT measures that can apply to food item. This is for you to understand more about what is the WTO SPS agreement and also and codex. For example, bottling method. Bottling method is under the SPS. Okay, which is it is aligned with the codex code for hygiene practice. Okay, and then for the description of the product is under the TBT. Okay, which is we know it also under a codex standard. And for the contaminant, okay, the contaminant of the food, it is fall under the SPS. So this SPS is must be aligned with the Codex General Standards for Contaminants. Okay. In terms of packaging material in direct contact with food is the SPS. In terms of labeling, okay, is under TBT, where it aligns with the Codex General Standard for the labeling of prepacked food. In terms of additives is under the SPS, which is aligned with the Codex General Standards for food additives. And in terms of the packaging specifications, it falls under a TBT. So in summary, the two WTO agreements of most significant for the international food trade are the SPS agreement, which concern measures to protect human, animal, and also plant health. And we have another WTO agreement that is very significant with the international food trade, which is TBT agreement, which is referred to more technical regulations and conformity assessment procedure for all commodities, not just food. And another good point also, good information is that you need to know that not all members of Codex are members of the WTO. And the obligations common to both the SPS and TBT agreement are to base their measures on international standards. There is non-discriminations and notifications of proposed measures and the creation of inquiry points. One of the main difference with regards to the obligation is that SPS measures must be sign-based, where the TBT measures may be based on other relevant factors, for example, geographical considerations. For the purpose of the SPS agreement, there is no differentiation between standards, guidelines, and recommendations that is elaborated by the Codex. And we know that it's very important for the Codex standards because they are the international benchmark standards for food safety that is recognized in the SPS agreement. So to recap, we have to know what is Codex and how Codex is organized, how Codex elaborate the standards, and also lastly, the final part is the WTO agreement of significance to Codex. How Codex is organized, it starts with the Commission, and then they have the Executive Committee, and they have the subsidiary bodies. There are 4 subsidiary bodies with different roles. How Codex elaborates standards, they must start with new work, with a proposal, and then after that they have to go through whether the 8 or 5 procedures and WTO agreements. There are 2 WTO agreements that are very significant with the international food trade, which are the SPS agreement and also the TBT agreement. That's all for now. Thank you.